Hello, everybody. My name is Nick. I am from ChannelBytes, and I am super excited to host a conversation today with two amazingly smart people. We have from Dell and from EVOTEK. Aaron and Ned bring a wealth of knowledge in the security space and technology space in general. We're going to be having a conversation around cyber resiliency. So before we kick it off, I'd like just to have Aaron and Ned introduce themselves, and once we do that, we'll jump into some of the topics that we have for today's conversation. Aaron.
My name is Erin Logue-Smith. I am with Dell Technologies Global Technology Office, and I'm with the Cyber and Compliance Practice Group. I have been with Dell since April of 2020. Previously, I have worked for a large bank in the United States, and I've been a lawyer working with data privacy and security for the past 10 years.
Awesome. And Ned.
Hi, good morning. I'm Ned Engelke. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at EVOTEK, a Southern California headquartered service provider and equipment provider to the enterprise. And today we're here to talk about the approaches that we're taking to help our customers achieve a better security profile and to deal with, with all the vagaries that happen in the world of reality when we have pandemics and state-sponsored attacks and all the other things that impact our customers' abilities to pursue their objectives.
Awesome. Well, thank you both for joining us, and certainly thank you for Dell and EVOTEK for sponsoring this conversation. So let's jump right into it. We're in 2021. Hard to believe. I'm glad. I don't think anybody sad to see 2020 exit the door. But there was a lot of lessons learned in 2020. And if you just look at some of the stats from the year, we ended the year, or almost the end of the year, with an amazingly bad attack that SolarWinds brought up, or basically was attacked, and really drove the point home around state-sponsored attacks causing quite a bit of issues. So I guess let's really dive into the first topic, which is the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room is, why are businesses, in 2020 and now as we get into 21, why are they approaching business and security in general the wrong way? Ned, what do you think?
I think there's two things that I see that appear to be mistakes that we advise our customers to mitigate. And one of those is organizational, where security is foundational, or it's fundamental to all the other aspects that we see inside of an IT approach. If you're developing software, it makes sense to incorporate security best practices, for example, to make sure that that the source code that you're incorporating from the public domain hasn't been compromised. What we've seen in our customers where they've had the most problems has been when they've pursued a very siloed approach, and they've had an adversarial relationship between the various pillars of IT functionality, including the security group. So that's number one. As we see a more robust and more holistic approach, we see much more efficacy in terms of how our customers are approaching things to achieve their goal of having a more secure environment. And the second piece is that I believe that there's an over-reliance on point products or on tooling. So a best practice for a security environment, regardless of which threat you're attempting to mitigate or contain, is defense in depth. It's going back to basics. It's thinking about, effectively you end up where you start. What are we trying to do? How do we do it? And an over-reliance on point products and tooling, I think, moves away from that and moves people into a much more vulnerable position. So those would be my two things: siloed organizations and an over-reliance on point products.
It's interesting, one of the, from a recent report that was put out at the end of the year, they were talking about that 40% of breaches are occurring because of weak links in the supply chain. Mm-hmm. So, that kind of reinforces that very point of, if you're not looking at all the different pieces along the path and you're looking in silos, you're just putting yourself at greater risk.
Agreed.
All right, Aaron, so what do you think?
Yeah, I have to agree. I think the elephant in the room. I think the pandemic really has, businesses are approaching things as if we were living in our past lives. This is a new world we're in. This is the new normal. Remote work is where we are, and I don't think it's going away. So I think, people are behind the ball. They're trying to catch up with the remote workforce, and they don't particularly have the tools in place to support, those vulnerabilities of their workforce being spread out across the nation, working from home. And then there's distractions on top of that. You have children running through, you have dogs barking. You know, I had to shut my door to keep my dogs out from this call. It's a new normal we're living in. And I think that that's where the elephant in the room is. We have to embrace it and make changes accordingly. You know, threat hygiene is really the landscape, and we have to fix our cyber resiliency programs to meet those requirements of today, of the new normal.
Can either one of you give me an example of something you saw last year that just basically reinforced that why, or reinforced that very problem? You know, the not having a holistic approach, being too distracted, you know, and again, without naming names, but just an example you saw in the people you're dealing with that like, hey, wow, this is really kind of hits home of why it's so important.
Ned, I'll let you go first.
No, go ahead. I'm trying to think of an example to illustrate all this.
I mean, this is kind of cliche, but one of the biggest things that I've seen are email phishing schemes that that was, you know, for our customers in particular, they had the most, you know, a lot of security breaches are coming from their customers clicking on things that they normally wouldn't in, you know, prior to the pandemic. And that's a lot of how people are getting in. And, you know, you can't protect an organization without really educating your employees on what they need to do to help keep things secure.
That's a great example.
Yeah, I wish I had a different one, but I don't. I think it's exactly to Aaron's point. We saw this explosion of sort of surface area. You know, we went from people who were used to working inside of an office and connecting only to their core data center, and everything was secure, their network and the assets that were running the applications and the data that was stored and everything else. And now suddenly they're working at home from Starbucks or wherever, and they don't know what a VPN is or any way of securing that communication. And even forgetting about those basics, something like a phishing email where, you know, we've faced this at our own company and we saw it at our customers where someone would get an email, would receive an email that appeared to be from our CEO saying, click me now, you know, or whatever. And we've had to go through and train people to look at the return addresses. And do you really think that he would do something like that? Or, you know, whatever, it just makes sense. So yeah, I think that to me, it's just exactly that. The explosion of surface area made everything a lot more pointed in terms of like the threat surface area.
I have a comical example of to the point about the CEO. We had a client who was attacked with phishing attack, and the message was, I mean, it was sent to somebody saying, go get a whole bunch of gift cards at this, I won't name the name of the store, but like the name of the store, which was be, you know, totally out of character for the business and for the CEO. But again, people fell for it and they clicked it, and then they have a problem. So it's interesting, you know, that point about, Aaron, you said the new normal and looking at things. I think looking back at the year and then moving forward, how much people now, you know, the terms remote access, the terms, you know, VPN and understanding phishing, all that. I guess the positive in this is that the education of people being more aware of security is a problem, is a good thing. That's a plus. So, all right, well, let's talk about, we said obviously the elephant in the room is, you know, the lack of having a holistic approach. It's, you know, I'm not truly looking at defense and across the whole plane of the network. Let's look at talking about how to look at data in a different way, right? So both EVOTEK and Dell, I mean, you guys are experts in technology. So if you're thinking about a customer, you know, whether it be the CIO, the CTO, the director of IT, as they think about 2021, how should they be looking at data? What should they be thinking about in their plans going forward this year? We'll start maybe with Aaron.
Well, I think a big challenge now is what I'm seeing with, you know, our customers, our clients and things is CEOs didn't particularly care as much as they should. They kind of let the lower, like not lower end, but their teams, they let their security teams own this as they should. But, you know, at this point in time in our new normal, this is a board level conversation. This is a legal conversation. These are things that they need to be concerned with from the top down. And I think change is slow, but it has to come from management. It has to come from the top down. And that's where the, you know, the money comes from the top down as well. So it's not cheap to make these types of changes or to implement some of the, you know, the regulatory guidance that has been put out. And it's definitely a conversation that needs to come from the top down. And it's, you know, I challenge my customers to think about their data. They have to think about it in a different way because, you know, the new disaster is a cyber attack. Disaster recovery is no longer enough. Like the chances of an earthquake, I live in Pittsburgh, we don't get earthquakes or floods or anything, hurricanes, but the chance of a massive large scale cyber attack, you know, that's the new normal. That's like my term of the day, new normal. But go ahead, Ned, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think two, one is a little bit, so first of all, maybe three. So the whole movement, let me say it this way. One of the things that's the most fascinating to me broadly about everything that we're seeing is that our customers are producing and managing and dealing with data that becomes more and more and more valuable as they shift how they go to market. They're competing now around the data sets that they produce, and they're more valuable to steal also, right? So we're seeing this increased surface area of opportunistic crime around what our customers are doing, while the organizations are set up to not support that. They're siloed and everything else. And so that organizational change is the biggest thing that we see. And then when we think about how to respond, you brought up a really good point, Aaron, that hits home, which is when we think about a resiliency plan, it's not a tooling conversation. It's what do you do when? And there's tools that support all those things. But what do you do when you have a plan to respond to an earthquake? That's a really common scheme. I live in Southern California. We have a lot of data centers that are across the coast here. And then we have a lot of backup data centers that are in the next state over in Nevada, because it's on the other side of a fault line. So we're very clear what to do with how to respond to that. But what do you do when there's a different set of conditions? We've got a pandemic. Now I can't get an operator into that facility because they didn't bring their mask or whatever it is, right? And so we have to think very carefully about what our inputs are that inform the architectures and inform our planning. And then I think the third thing that that jumped out at me when I thinking about recovery isn't enough is back to the point I made before. You can't approach these problems with a point product. You can't say, well, I've got backup, now I can recover. Well, no, you can't. One of the things that we value a lot about our engagements with Dell through the cyber recovery tool set is that it's much more comprehensive. You have a very sophisticated solution that's also very much back to basics. We need to have physical separation. We need to have logical separation. We need to have replication that can go across networks. We need to be able to do things with it when the unexpected happens. And so we love that tool set that we can incorporate into the architectures that start where Aaron started, which was, let's make a decision to do this correctly. So
let's go back. That is great feedback. So we're talking to CEOs. I mean, Aaron, you said it's a board level discussion. It's a top down discussion. And Ned, all those things that you bulleted out, right? Those are decisions that require budget, right? They require budget and time and focus. Let's back up to the legal piece of the data. Is there anything, Aaron, you would say, if I'm an executive leader at a business and I'm looking at data, what is, from a legal perspective, what should I consider? What do I need to make sure that I'm thinking about first? And then once I understand the legal piece of it, all right, now we jump into the technology piece and organizational pieces that Ned was talking about.
Well, I think, Ned mentioned that it's valuable. This is, data is considered the most valuable asset on the planet, more than oil, more than gold. So from a legal perspective, you have to think about how you're going to protect your most valuable asset. And it's not as simple as something that's physical. I mean, data in general it's out there. So for it's very challenging, I find, for a lot of lawyers to comprehend why this is so important. But protecting your data from a legal perspective is going to protect them from fines from the government. It's going to protect them from lawsuits from customers that their data has been breached. They can have, criminal and other types of lawsuits that are coming to them. So I think this is definitely a new type of legal ramifications that teams are actually, I read an article saying that they're ramping up legal teams with specifics around data protection and data privacy because it's just gotten so into the weeds, and this is where all the money's coming from. So they have to protect themselves internally from a legal perspective, but also make sure they're protecting their customers and clients. And so the legal teams are actually reviewing their cybersecurity plans to make sure that they're meeting what the government is suggesting. So this is not just, this is a huge topic now for everyone within an organization, and it has to be something that people work together with.
So let's go deeper on that a little bit. And I know to your point about the spend and investment, I mean, I think we've probably all seen the stats of, IT spending's doubled, 20% or more over the last several years because of things like this. How should the legal team and the IT team work together? I mean, because we've talked, Ned brought up the kind of the end-to-end view of organizations. What advice would you give for the legal team and the technology team to work better together?
Well, so I was, like I said, I worked previously before Dell with a large bank in the United States. And what we did when GDPR came out, that was the huge first big privacy thing and they didn't talk too much about security, but there were a lot of data security changes that we had to make within the organization. And we formed a privacy cyber steering committee. So we had, the chief compliance officer, the chief privacy officer, the CISO. We had multiple people on this panel where we met every 2 weeks to discuss how we were going to implement these changes and roll them out. And we really had to go through and dig through all of our technology, all of our, assets and things like that, and really decide what was the most important, what was mission critical to protect, and, what needs to be, secure, isolated, and potentially, put in a vault for if we were attacked, how we would recover and make sure that our customers had instant, maybe not instant, but very quick access to their bank accounts, because that was super important to people. Hopefully that answered your question.
Ned, from your perspective, how do you, what advice would you give to the technology crew of how they should be thinking about it to work across the organization, with the legal teams, with the other organizations that they're not typically used to working with?
So I think Aaron brought up a really good point, which is that as we see this acceleration of value around the data, we've seen an acceleration of regulation around how that data is handled and how it's thought about, whether it's privacy or the liability for mishandling it or all those things. And so that's a very real factor. And so it's such a real factor, and it's so, if you get it wrong, it's such a big problem that everybody in an organization needs to be thinking about it, but they may not have the ability to. So what EVOTEK is doing to support that is we engage with our customers and then start asking questions like, okay, do you know what the regulatory impact is if you move data from one state to another? If you're, for example, if you're involved in gaming in Nevada, you have to be able to demonstrate that the data that you store is stored within Nevada. Does that allow you to replicate? I don't know. We have to see. Does it allow you to leverage a public hyperscaler for a cloud storage? Don't know. Have to figure that out. If you're a medical company, like a hospital chain, and you are storing data and you have stored it incorrectly, what then liability comes to you through HIPAA or whatever else? And so for our own organizational purposes, we keep that regulatory compliance skill set within our security group, just because it seems like where it naturally occurs in the conversations. But we're seeing more and more and more infrastructure focused people being aware of those considerations and then forming groups like what Aaron described to then make sure that they have a holistic approach to whatever it is they're doing, so that nobody's responsible for killing the company, I guess. So we're seeing that collection, the collaboration accelerate, which is something that's very exciting to me, I guess, is my point.
I guess fear of killing the company can definitely cause people to work better together, I guess.
I like to call it having as many fingerprints on the gun.
Yeah. But no, we're seeing that accelerate, and this is my favorite thing about what's happening. It may sound weird, but this whole collapsing of these silos makes everything a little bit more complex initially, but makes it move much more smoothly for our customers. So I'm glad for that. I'm glad that there are multiple drivers, even though this is not a happy one. You know.
So that's a good segue to we've talked about the elephant in the room. We've talked about looking at data differently and the value that it brings, and obviously looking at stock of Google and other companies. Clearly, data is worth a lot of money. But let's go deeper on the business drivers, and again, what people should look out for. Right? You've brought up obviously the organizational pieces. We've talked about the legal pieces. Are there other drivers that really should be considered as we go into this new year? And if somebody wants to learn more and they're trying to educate themselves, what do? Right? Because obviously, even though staffing has improved, a lot of people, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Well, Aaron, do you mind if I jump in? I have a thought here. It's
Nope.
top of mind. I am planning for 2021, so it's right at the beginning of the year. One of the things that we're seeing accelerate is that, it comes back to this overall theme. We have our customers competing in the marketplace of ideas. And so they want, increasingly, they want their software stack. They want the infrastructure that supports that software stack and everything else that's associated with it. They want that to be very custom for them. It's how they compete, and they want it to be, to use a buzzword, agile, or they want it to be as flexible as possible so that they can adapt to changing business circumstances. And so that's the biggest driver that we see, and that is both good and bad for a security posture. It's good because we have much more granular control over the stack, and we're revisiting everything as they have these changing business priorities. And so when we're able to engage with our customers, we start off with something very basic. What's the objective that you're trying to pursue, right? You want to have secured, resilient data, and you have these other objectives. It needs to be faster from a software development standpoint and faster to run it when it's in the market. So then once we understand those imperatives, then we can break out into architectures and approaches that match where that customer is to get them to their goal. And that's our biggest driver that we see, is that our customers are changing the way that they think about IT to become a more emphatic business enabler. And then that makes these other decisions easier.
Basically, embrace the paradigm shift, right?
Yeah, we're seeing that accelerate, and that's the biggest driver that we see. It's very broad, I know, but that is influencing how we invest to support our customers. It's influencing the tools that they take on board, and more importantly, the architectures and advice that they take on board from us to support those objectives. And so that's what we're seeing for accelerating through 2020, and that's what we're investing around for 2021.
And I'd love to hear Aaron's comment as well, but I'm just maybe take a step back, and as we think about these drivers, maybe how did you each define resiliency? When we think about resiliency, like in all these different areas, like, do all businesses have the same definition of that when you think of how do you keep your business resilient from attacks?
I'll go first on that, and I'm sorry, Aaron, and I don't mean to step on you, but
no,
they all have a profoundly different view on what resiliency is, and that makes it even more exciting. So, I mentioned casinos before. Think about the liability that a casino has for not having a floor with slot machines on it operating. That might be millions of dollars a minute. I mean, it's astonishing, the economic impact. And that could be very different from Ned's HVAC shop, where if my email is down, so what? My trucks are rolling, right? And I just picked two polar examples, but yeah, we see this profoundly different. It very much depends on what they're doing and the value that they perceive that they're receiving from the data that they produce and monetize, and their scale and everything else. So, and of course, the geographic distribution of their company. All of these things impact what they think of when they think about resiliency. But of course, it all boils down to everybody wants it 100% available all the time and perfectly secure. So how do we get there? That's the challenge.
Aaron?
Well, I think from my perspective, I like to think about what my customers, what's most important to them right now. And I think for, looking forward into 2021, things in 2020 were very reactive. A lot of customers were calling us to come and, to look at their cyber resiliency plans after an attack, or after the regulatory bodies put out statements like the FBI for K through 12 education or healthcare providers. A lot of our, conversations have been reactive, and I'm really hoping that into 2021, people are going to start thinking about cyber resiliency prior to suffering an attack. I think, like you mentioned earlier, there was a huge breach at the end of the year, and I think it really just, what people need to take away from that is, it's only a matter of time. It doesn't matter who you are. You could be small, you could be large. You're going to be attacked. This is what's going to happen. You have to prepare for it. And I've had, customers say, well, the government agencies have been hacked, so why should we listen to what the regulators are saying? And it just proves that no one's immune. Everyone's vulnerable in some way or some fashion. And the cyber criminals are just getting better and smarter. So, protecting, gold copy images, isolating them, and, keeping them off your network is really the only way to recover from a cyber attack without paying a ransom. And sometimes even when you do pay a ransom, you're not going to get your data back. So I think for 2021, I'm hoping that the business drivers will be not as reactive, and it will be planning and preparing for, what's inevitable down the road. Sadly to say.
How do you convince somebody that, we deal with a lot with enterprise level customers too, and there are still some people that believe that they are immune to a security attack. What do you tell them? Outside of just showing you there's thousands of articles, but how do you position it, especially to a leadership of really that why? Like, hey, you really should listen to what we're saying.
I think I try to have an honest conversation with people, just because like the government regulations, we don't have a federal, security per se regulation, but I think that they have put out, all of the regulatory bodies have put out the same type of language. And I think that it's really a best practices guide. Some people are going to take pieces of it. Some people are going to take all of it. I think it's just the fact that we have to accept that even if a regulatory body has been hacked, that they're still putting out really great guidance that we should follow. And you have to have a conversation, and sometimes it takes multiple conversations to get people to understand that cyber resiliency is a long-term strategy, and it's a long-term plan that has to be implemented in your enterprise, overall program. And, some people get it right away. Some people already come to the table and are excited to talk about it, and other people take a little convincing. It's like that with anybody. You just have to educate and hope that people start to understand the importance of protecting yourself before an attack actually happens.
You agree, Ned?
Well, I'm smiling because this is top of mind, which is how do you get this discussion going? And we're taking a very similar track to Erin, which is that, or to her and her group, which is that we first start out by having a very frank discussion with our customers about what's happening in the world of threats. Like why is the sophistication accelerating? And there's a bunch of reasons. There are state actors that are involved. They have effectively infinite resources, right? And they're strongly motivated to do things. That's the reality. There's no reason to hide from it. It's happening. And on top of that, it's a lucrative enough space that we have almost a parallel economy for people who are wanting to break into your environment, Mr. Customer. There's public domain source code, there's startup companies, there's investors, there's practitioners that float between them, right? And they may or may not have the cover from a government, but it doesn't really matter. So the level of sophistication is increasing dramatically, and nobody's perfect. And so the response has to be, the only thing that we can figure to do is to follow the basic security maxims of defense in depth, have a plan for what happens when, have physical separation, have logical separation of your data, have a plan that encompasses the known unknowns, so that's how we're starting the discussions, which is, really just having a very realistic approach, right? Which is, there's no reason to sugarcoat it. And we're not And we're doing that a lot. And again, I emphasize there's no point solution. There's simply philosophical approaches that help. And those approaches, in the case of Dell, have informed a very robust product line that is very appropriate for being separated with good catalogs and other things. We can see that helping our customers a lot. But I'm not pretending that there's a product, right? We're focusing on, a larger, more holistic approach, I guess.
Yeah, no, it makes total sense. So I guess let's hit the kind of a final topic of, we did talk originally about the different organizations. We jokingly talked about how, what is the multiple fingerprints on the gun. We don't want to kill the business, so to speak. That's a great analogy. I will definitely use that later. But when we do, organizations are complicated, and Ned mentioned it earlier, as did Aaron. As we think about this, and Ned, you talked about the philosophy of it. There are a lot of different philosophies of how to approach building a resilient system in your business. What are some real tangible takeaways that the listeners can say, hey, if I work in IT, I work in sales, I work in legal, I work in supply chain, a lot of these people, all of this stuff is not top of mind. It's not even, it's way down the list of importance because it's not in their day-to-day. Are there things that, advice or things you would, share with, executive leadership or leadership in these departments to try to help explain why it's important to them, and that working together ultimately will benefit them? And this is tough, especially, we deal with a lot of sales organizations too, right? Salespeople don't necessarily focus on the security aspect of it because that's not where they're playing. So I'm just curious, trying to give some real tangible tips for people. Aaron and Ned, either one.
Go ahead, Ned.
Okay, so you said something earlier, Aaron, which I've been sitting here thinking about both during the call, but also prior to the call, which is that in a lot of cases, these security decisions have moved from being, I'm going to put it a different way, but you said it became a board level decision. But what that really means is that security used to be like an afterthought or a sidecar as a part of an infrastructure team. So you've got some poor schlub who's responsible for, installing endpoint protection on computers, and you say, done, right? And now suddenly, all of these other imperatives that we described have rolled up into having CISOs that report to the board and are peers to, or maybe even superiors to, the infrastructure team. So our customers, especially the larger, more sophisticated ones, are acknowledging this imperative by changing their organization to match up against it. So all of the people that interact with those companies need to be cognizant and especially aware of what the priorities are and the imperatives of these companies. And if they aren't, then they aren't useful, right? We're here to serve our customers and help them achieve our objectives. If they're telling us that their objectives are to have security as a part of everything that they do, whatever they call it, maybe it's resiliency, maybe we stop calling it security, I don't care, right? All of these things, then to serve our customers, we have to be cognizant of it. And so the people that don't are left by the wayside. They end up finding themselves, working at Ned's HVAC shop with the 10 mailboxes as opposed to on something much more sophisticated. So yeah, we're seeing that. This has been actually a lot easier as a driver for us, because you mentioned salespeople are not always cognizant, but my experience has been that people in sales organizations tend to be very attuned to what their customer imperatives are, what their customers' imperatives are. So we're seeing this be, that part has been easier than I would have thought.
Aaron, what do you think?
So I think, to close things out and, make things I like to close my conversations with our customers with a couple things that will stick in their minds, like the tough customers that don't want to accept that, this is what we have to deal with today. So one of the articles I read that actually you sent mentioned one of them, the 3 Ps, the predict, prioritize, and practice. Like, you have to predict that something is going to happen. You have to prioritize security in your, your infrastructure, your environment, and with your employees, training, things like that. That's huge. And then, you have to practice. You have to put it into practice. You have to implement these things, and you have to test your vulnerable points. And then the 3 I's are huge at Dell: the isolate, immutable, and intelligent. You have to isolate your gold copy data. You have to make it immutable, retention lock it, secure it, and you have to make sure it's intelligent. You have to be able to analyze it. You have to have analytics that can, identify where a cyber attack might have come from. Those are things that we do provide here at Dell. And I'm not saying that, our solution is the only solution, but, a cyber recovery plan is, based on these principles. And, I think the regulators are all saying the same thing. And we have to think about how we're really going to protect ourselves in 2021 and moving forward, because this really is just the beginning. The cyber attacks at the end of the year were more sophisticated than we've seen in a while. And that means that's just what we caught. So there's so much that we haven't caught, and there's so much more that's going to be happening, because they have unlimited funds and the motivation. Whenever your data is worth, its weight in gold, this is what's going to be under attack coming forward. So that's my 2 cents.
Ned, as we close things out, do you have any parting thoughts as well?
Yeah, I do. So I love the way that Aaron described that whole motion, because it is a much more informative approach than mine, which is go back to basics and have defense in depth, which is plan for the known unknowns. I think the one thing, there's sort of 2 things that I want to emphasize. One is that, look, we've been securing environments both physically and against these types of attacks for decades, and there are some things that we can do that end up allowing us to control for or work with the known unknowns. Like Aaron made a great point. If you've got a golden copy of your data, why have it connected constantly to your network where it might be subject to compromise? So all of these basic, I don't want to call that basic, but these basic philosophical approaches continue to be relevant. That's number one. And then the second thing, which I was thinking about while you were describing kind of all this stuff, Aaron, is that everybody, government, industry, large and small companies are facing the same problems. They're facing the same threats, they're facing the same imperatives, they're facing the same level of sophistication. And so don't be afraid to network with your peers. Don't be afraid to get involved in organizations. The government, of all people, is very willing to share some of the data that they have about what's going on. We have a lot. Well, we're very close to the FBI Office for Cybersecurity here in San Diego. We have a bunch of ex-FBI members, and so there's immense collaboration and there's immense willingness to share information back and forth, both from those folks who have all those resources and then your peers in industry. So don't be shy about asking for help. What are people doing and what's worked and what are you thinking about and what have you seen? I'm fascinated with the space. It isn't the only thing that we do, but it seems like security and compliance are woven into every solution that we create for our customers. And when they're not, I feel like the sales rep is screwing it up. So no, it's top of mind.
Yeah.
And I'm even, I've got to tell you, I'm even reluctant to have just now a philosophical approach. I'm worried that we have organized ourselves incorrectly. We have a group of security practitioners who are all focused in this area. And then we have a few folks that are both in that group and in adjacent ones that sort of incorporate security into what they do. Like our person who helps customers develop software more readily happens to also be a security practitioner. And so when he builds an architecture, he incorporates it all in there. And I worry that calling the approach security makes us think about it in a silo. And I'm trying to figure out how to fight against that internally now so that we can have a more holistic approach. Anyway, just
no, I mean, we wondered, we had a conversation over the holidays about just the term and the title CISOs.
Yeah.
And we were talking about, there's always been, between CISOs, CIOs, CTOs, there's, some fuzzy lines. And, the conversation was like, is to that point, Ned, is having a CISO, are you by title forcing people down a path and making them be motivated by certain things that could adversely affect the business?
Sure seems like it to me. You go where you look, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and people are people. I mean, you're motivated by whether it be compensation, your goals, your KPIs, like, are those types of things, is that going to actually hurt us when we're trying to do what you guys' great advice is, which is look across the board?
I think it does. But I think it's decelerating just as you move that position up to somebody who has to make a commitment to the board. Then who cares what you call it? Now you've got a very broad remit, and we're seeing that change organizational behavior quite a bit. So I'm fascinated with this problem. I don't know if it's just changing the title, but this is the reality that we're seeing. Are you seeing the same thing, Erin? You probably see different customers than I do.
Well, I mean, I don't think any of us knew in October of last year what we would be facing. So I find it incredibly fascinating because my experience in this role started during this pandemic and during this huge influx of cyber attacks. So it's been extremely fascinating to me and exciting to be a part of this team and learn. I'm learning so much, but I'm also helping people. So I thought, I'm a lawyer. I want to be a lawyer, but I'm doing it in a different capacity, and I'm still helping our customers, and we're helping them to protect themselves, their organizations, and their customers. So I find it to be a very exciting time to be working in this field, and it's only going to grow. And hopefully I'll grow with it. And I love it. I'm happy to be here. It's fascinating. I feel bad for people that are suffering from it, but what can we do? All we can do is help them if we can.
It is fascinating that the legal, I mean, obviously GDPR and a lot of the legal regulations have been around for a while, but it is that more and more, just investment on the legal front around this space, right? Like it's I'm curious to see how everybody does work together though.
It's a challenge. It's definitely a challenge. Personalities are strong. CEOs, CISOs, lawyers are a nightmare. But getting everyone to the table and getting them used to working together and having reoccurring meetings so that it doesn't, I know nobody has time for anything, but you have to make the time. And I think having reoccurring meetings, having those conversations, even if there's nothing on the agenda, just having a sit down and talking about your security and what's going on in the company, I think that's where, strong personalities start to work together. They see the betterment for the company in that way. So
there are a lot of strong personalities in our business.
You think?
Yeah. And guys, both Erin and Ned, thank you so much. Obviously, Dell for sponsoring this, EVOTEK, outstanding solutions provider, expert in the technology space using Dell technology for a lot of amazing solutions. So we thank both of you for being guests and sharing your insight with people. And with that, we will close it out. Thank you again for the conversation.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks, Ned. Thanks, guys.